On Father's Day, my son pushed me out of the car during the safari and shouted, "Today the lions will have a different lunch, you useless old man." He drove away smiling while I ran after the car, but when he arrived at the hotel, I was already at the door. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought Father's Day would become the day I lost my son forever. Not to death, but to something far worse. The realization that the child I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for had become a stranger capable of wishing me dead. The morning started like any other safari day in Kenya. Matthew had insisted on this trip, said it would be quality time for just the two of us. At 58, I was grateful my 32-year-old son still wanted to spend time with his old man. After his mother died 8 years ago, our relationship had been the only thing keeping me anchored to this world. "Dad, you're going to love this," Matthew said as we climbed into the open-air safari vehicle. His smile seemed genuine enough, but looking back now, I can see the coldness that was always lurking beneath the surface. I've arranged for us to go off the beaten path today. Just you, me, and the wilderness. The guide had called in sick that morning, or so Matthew told me. He'd convinced me he could handle the driving himself. "I've done this route before with friends," he assured me, though I couldn't remember him mentioning any previous trips to Kenya, but I trusted him. God help me, I always trusted him. For the first hour, everything seemed perfect. We spotted a herd of elephants, some graceful gazelles, and even managed to photograph a leopard resting in an acacia tree. Matthew was animated, talking about his recent breakup with Sarah, his struggles at work, how he was trying to figure things out. I listened with the patience only a father can have, offering advice he pretended to consider. "You know, Dad," he said, as we drove deeper into the reserve, "I've been thinking about what really matters in life." "That's good to hear, son. Your mother always said you were a deep thinker." He laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I remembered from his childhood. My mom said a lot of things. The vehicle came to a stop near a watering hole where several lions were resting in the shade. My heart pounded with excitement. I'd never seen lions this close. Matthew turned off the engine and we sat in silence watching these magnificent predators. That's when everything changed. "Dad," Matthew said, his voice suddenly flat, emotionless. "Get out." I turned to look at him, confused. "What?" I said, "Get out of the car." The change in his tone sent chills down my spine. This wasn't my son speaking. This was someone else entirely. "Matthew, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay?" His face twisted into something I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. "You really don't get it, do you?" "You never have." Before I could process what was happening, his hands were on my shoulders, pushing me toward the door. I grabbed onto the seat, trying to understand what was going on. "Matthew, stop! What are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago," he snarled, shoving me harder. "Today the lions will have a different lunch, you useless old man." The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the boy I'd read bedtime stories to, taught to ride a bike, walked to school on his first day, was trying to feed me to the lions. The absurdity of it mixed with the terror of realizing he was serious. I fought against him, but at 58, I wasn't as strong as I used to be. Matthew was younger, bigger, and fueled by a rage I couldn't comprehend. With one final shove, I tumbled out of the vehicle and hit the ground hard, scraping my hands and knees on the rocky soil. The lions looked up at the commotion. Several of them started moving in our direction. "Matthew, please." I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm your father," he laughed. Actually laughed, as he moved into the driver's seat. "Yeah, and what a disappointment that's been." The engine roared to life. I lunged for the vehicle, but Matthew gunned it, leaving me stumbling in a cloud of dust. Through the settling dirt, I could see him smiling, actually smiling, as he drove away. The lions were closer now. I could hear their low rumbles, see their golden eyes fixed on me. Every survival instinct kicked in as I started running toward where I thought the main road might be. My legs, weak from years of desk work and too much comfort food, burned with each step. My lungs felt like they were on fire. Behind me, I could hear movement in the brush. I didn't dare look back. As I ran, stumbling over rocks and through thorny bushes, my mind kept replaying those words. Today the lions will have a different lunch, you useless old man. The venom in his voice, the coldness in his eyes. Where had that come from? When had my loving son become this stranger who wanted me dead? I thought about all the times I'd bailed him out of trouble, the credit card debts I'd quietly paid off, the rent money I'd provided when he was between jobs, the car I'd bought him for his 30th birthday, the down payment I'd given him for his apartment. Every time he'd called needing help, I'd been there without question. After his mother died, I'd made Matthew the center of my world. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I'd loved him too much, given him too much, expected too little in return. The sound of an approaching vehicle made me nearly collapse with relief. A park ranger's truck appeared through the dust, and I flagged it down frantically. "Sir, are you all right?" The young ranger jumped out, taking in my torn clothes and bleeding knees. "My son?" I gasped, still trying to catch my breath. "He left me here, with the lions." The ranger's expression shifted from concern to confusion to alarm. As we drove back toward the main lodge, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But the more I thought about it, the clearer one thing became. This wasn't a moment of madness or a cruel joke gone wrong. Matthew had meant every word. The ranger dropped me off at the Serena Safari Lodge just as the sun was beginning to set. My hands were still shaking as I thanked him, my mind struggling to process what had happened. As I walked through the elegant lobby, other guests stared at my torn clothes and disheveled appearance, but I barely noticed them. All I could think about was Matthew's face when he'd pushed me from that vehicle. The complete absence of love, of recognition, of anything human in his eyes. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. I was heading toward the front desk to ask about getting a room. I couldn't bear the thought of staying in the same space as him when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Well, look who made it back." I turned around, and there he was. Matthew, sitting casually in one of the leather armchairs near the bar, a drink in his hand, looking completely relaxed, as if he hadn't just tried to murder his own father an hour ago. The sight of him made my legs weak. "How did you get here so fast?" He shrugged, taking a sip of what looked like whiskey. "I know shortcuts, you don't, old man." The casual cruelty in his voice made something inside me snap. I walked over to his chair, my hands clenched into fists. "What the hell is wrong with you, Matthew? I'm your father." "Keep your voice down," he said, not even looking at me. "You're making a scene." I glanced around and realized he was right. Other guests were starting to stare, whispering among themselves. I forced myself to lower my voice, but the anger was still there, burning in my chest. "You left me to die out there. But you didn't die, did you?" He finally looked up at me, and that cold smile was back. Maybe the lions weren't hungry. I sank into the chair across from him, suddenly feeling every one of my 58 years. "When did you become this person?" "What person?" He leaned back, completely at ease. "Someone who's tired of pretending?" "Pretending what?" "That I actually give a damn about you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been prepared for many things in life, losing my wife to cancer, struggling with my business, the general disappointments that come with getting older. But I'd never prepared for my own son to look me in the eye and tell me he didn't care if I lived or died. "Matthew, I know you're going through a difficult time with the breakup, with work stress, but this has nothing to do with Sarah or work." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "This is about you being weak, pathetic, and completely oblivious to reality." I felt tears beginning to form, and I hated myself for it. I don't understand what I did wrong. That's exactly the problem. He finished his drink and signaled the bartender for another. "You never understood anything." As he spoke, memories began flooding back. Not the good ones I usually cherished, but different moments. The way he'd roll his eyes when I'd try to give him advice. How he'd change the subject whenever I talked about his mother. The impatience in his voice when I'd call to check on him. The way he'd look at his phone when I was talking, as if I was boring him. Had I been blind to who he really was all these years? "Your mother saw it, you know," Matthew said, as if reading my thoughts. Near the end, when the cancer was eating her alive, she told me she was worried about what kind of man I was becoming. My breath caught. "She never said anything to me." "Of course she didn't. She was protecting you like she always did. Someone had to, since you lived in your own little fantasy world where your perfect son could do no wrong. The bartender brought his drink, and Matthew raised it in a mock toast. To dear old Mom, at least her suffering is over. Don't you dare talk about her like that. Like what? Honestly? He took a long sip. She died knowing her son was a disappointment and her husband was a fool. But hey, at least you got to play the grieving widower. People felt sorry for you. Poor Jacob lost his wife. Now he's all alone with just his son. Every word was calculated to hurt, and it was working. But beneath the pain, something else was growing. A cold realization that the person sitting across from me wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. You planned this, I said quietly. The safari, getting rid of the guide, taking me to that specific spot. Matthew's smile widened. Took you long enough to figure that out. But why? Because I'm tired of waiting? Waiting for what? He leaned forward, his eyes bright with something that looked almost like excitement. Work for you to finally do something useful with your pathetic existence. I didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said it made my blood run cold. There was something behind his words, some larger plan I couldn't see yet. You know what your problem is, Dad? You think being nice makes you a good person. You think loving someone means never holding them accountable. You turned me into this. I didn't turn you into anything. I loved you. You spoiled me. There's a difference. He stood up, dropping some bills on the table. But don't worry, your usefulness isn't completely over yet. As he walked toward the elevators, he called back over his shoulder. Oh, and Dad, we're sharing a room tonight. I already checked us in. Hope you don't mind the single bed. I told them you snore, so they put us in one of the smaller rooms. I sat there for a long time after he disappeared, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Other guests came and went, the bar filled with laughter and conversation, but I felt completely alone. The worst part wasn't that my son had tried to kill me. The worst part was that I was beginning to understand he'd been dead to me for years. I just hadn't been willing to see it. But now I did see it. And for the first time in my life, I was going to have to decide what to do about it. That night, lying on the cramped single bed while Matthew sprawled comfortably on the couch he'd claimed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face when he'd pushed me from that vehicle. The complete absence of remorse, the casual cruelty, the way he'd smiled as he drove away. But what haunted me more were the memories that kept surfacing. Moments I'd dismissed or explained away over the years, now taking on a sinister new meaning. When Matthew was 12, our neighbor's cat went missing. Mrs. Henderson was devastated, putting up flyers everywhere calling Matthew's name, since the cat always seemed to like him. A week later, she found the cat in her garden shed, dead. The vet said it looked like it had been trapped there deliberately, but Matthew swore he'd never seen it. I believed him, of course. My son wouldn't hurt an innocent animal. At 15, his girlfriend Emma broke up with him. The next week, someone spread intimate photos of her around school. When I asked Matthew about it, he just shrugged and said she probably sent them to other boys. Girls like that always get what's coming to them, Dad. I should have been alarmed by his coldness, but instead I was proud that he wasn't heartbroken over some teenage romance. During his senior year, his teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, failed him on an important project. Matthew came home furious, saying the teacher had it out for him. 2 days later, Mr. Rodriguez was arrested for possession of drugs that were found in his classroom. Matthew was sympathetic when I expressed shock. Some people just hide who they really are, Dad. You're too trusting. I never questioned how prescient that statement was. Now, listening to him breathe peacefully on the couch, I was starting to see the pattern I'd been blind to for 20 years. Dad, you awake? His voice cut through the darkness. I didn't answer, hoping he'd think I was sleeping. I know you're awake. I can tell by your breathing. I remained silent, but he continued anyway. You want to know when I first realized what a disappointment you were? His voice was conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. I was 8 years old. Tommy Martinez pushed me off the swing at school, and when I came home crying, you told me to turn the other cheek and be the bigger person. I remembered that day. Martha had backed me up, saying violence never solved anything. The next day, Tommy pushed me again, and again the day after that. So you know what I did? I could hear him shifting on the couch, getting comfortable. I waited until recess, and when no one was looking, I pushed Tommy off the monkey bars. He broke his wrist. And you know what? He never touched me again. That's when I learned the difference between being strong and being weak. My chest felt tight. Matthew, you told us Tommy fell on his own. Of course I did. Because I knew you'd never understand that sometimes you have to hurt people to get what you want. You and Mom with your be kind to others and treat people how you want to be treated. What a joke. I finally spoke. Your mother and I were trying to teach you to be a good person. He laughed softly. You were trying to teach me to be a victim. Like you. I'm not a victim. Really? Then why did Mom walk all over you? Why does everyone at your office treat you like a pushover? Why did I just leave you in the middle of lion country and here you are, lying in the same room with me, instead of calling the police? Each question was like a knife twist, partly because I couldn't answer them. You want to know why I really brought you here, Dad? I didn't want to know, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. Why? Because I need money. A lot of it. And you're going to give it to me. My blood ran cold. What kind of trouble are you in, Matthew? The expensive kind. He sat up on the couch, and I could see his silhouette in the moonlight streaming through the window. I owe some people who don't take. I'll pay you next week for an answer. How much? 200,000. I nearly choked. Matthew, I don't have that kind of money just lying around. But you have assets. The house, your retirement accounts, Mom's life insurance money that you've been sitting on for 8 years like some kind of shrine to her memory. The callousness in his voice when he mentioned Martha made me sick. That money was supposed to be for emergencies. For what? You're 58 years old, Dad. You're not going to remarry. You're not going to travel the world. You're just going to sit in that house, surrounded by Mom's things, feeling sorry for yourself until you die. At least this way, the money serves a purpose. And if I refuse? The silence stretched between us for a long moment. Well, he said finally, you've seen how creative I can be when I need to solve problems. Today was just a practice run. The threat was clear, and it terrified me. But what terrified me more was the realization that this conversation felt rehearsed, like he'd been planning it for months. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? Ever since Sarah left me. She said I was emotionally unavailable and possibly dangerous. Can you believe that? All because I told her what I really thought about her friends. Women are so dramatic. I remembered Sarah. She'd been sweet, intelligent, and clearly cared about Matthew. But whenever she'd tried to include me in their conversations or plans, Matthew would find ways to cut the visits short. At the time, I thought he was just being protective of our relationship. Now I wondered what she'd actually seen in him that I'd missed. Sarah was a good girl, Matthew. Sarah was a naive little princess who thought she could change me. Just like you think you can lecture me into being the son you want instead of the son you raised. His words hit home because they carried a terrible truth. I had raised him. Every permissive decision, every excuse I'd made for his behavior, every time I'd cleaned up his messes without consequences, I'd created this person sitting across from me in the dark. After Martha died, I'd been so desperate not to lose anyone else that I'd never set boundaries. When he'd quit his job to find himself, I'd supported him financially. When he'd gotten into fights at bars, I'd paid for lawyers. When he'd wrecked 3 cars in 2 years, I'd bought him new ones. I'd thought I was being a loving father. Instead, I'd been enabling a monster. You're right, I said quietly. I did help make you this way. He seemed surprised by my admission. So you'll transfer the money? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I turned to look at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. I'm saying I finally understand what your mother saw before she died. She wasn't just worried about what kind of man you were becoming, was she? She knew exactly what you already were. For the first time that day, Matthew looked uncertain. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm not the same weak man who let you push him around for 20 years. Today, when you left me out there, something changed. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Matthew. It was a lie. I was terrified. But something in my voice must have convinced him because he got up from the couch and moved closer to my bed. You should be afraid, old man. Maybe, but you should be afraid too. Of what? of what happens when a father finally stops loving his son. The next morning, Matthew was gone when I woke up. There was a note on the nightstand written in his familiar handwriting. Gone to arrange our early checkout. Have your decision ready by noon. Don't disappoint me again. M. Even his notes were threats now. I sat on the edge of the bed, my body aching from the uncomfortable night and the trauma of yesterday. But my mind was clearer than it had been in years. For the first time since Martha's funeral, I felt like I had a purpose. I showered, put on clean clothes, and went down to the lobby. The concierge, a friendly Kenyan woman named Grace, greeted me with concern. Mr. Ferutro Thompson, are you feeling better today? The ranger mentioned you had quite an ordeal yesterday. Much better, thank you. I paused, then made a decision. Grace, I need to make some important phone calls, international calls. Is there somewhere private I could use? Of course, sir. You can use the business center. It's quiet this time of morning. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a small office with a phone, a computer, and the privacy I needed. My first call was to my lawyer, David Chen, back in Portland. Jacob? Good God, man, do you know what time it is here? David, I need you to listen carefully. I need to make some changes to my will, and I need them done today. There was a pause. Jacob, are you all right? You sound strange. I'm fine. Better than I've been in years, actually. But I need to know, if I wanted to remove Matthew as my beneficiary and redirect everything to charity, how quickly could that be done? Well, I'd need to draft new documents, have them witnessed properly. Jacob, what's going on? I gave him the abbreviated version. Matthew's mounting debts, his demands for money, his increasingly threatening behavior. I didn't mention the safari incident. David would have insisted I call the police, and I wasn't ready for that yet. Jesus, Jacob, I'm so sorry. I know how much that boy meant to you. He's not a boy anymore, David, and I'm starting to think I never really knew who he was. All right, I can have new documents drawn up and sent to the American Embassy in Nairobi for proper witnessing. You could have this finalized by tomorrow if you're serious about this. I'm serious. Send everything to the embassy. And, David, make sure everything goes to the Children's Cancer Research Foundation in Martha's name. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment, thinking about what Martha would say if she knew what I was planning. Then I remembered what Matthew had said about her final words, her worries about what he was becoming. Maybe she'd understand. My second call was to my bank. Within an hour, I'd moved most of my liquid assets into accounts Matthew didn't know about. The house was already in a trust that would transfer to charity upon my death. By the time I finished, Matthew would inherit nothing but debt and disappointment. But that wasn't enough. He'd threatened me, and I had no doubt he meant it. If I cut him off financially, he'd find another way to get what he wanted. He'd already proven he was willing to kill for it. That's when I made my third call to someone I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Peterson Investigations. This is Mike. Mike, it's Jacob Thompson. I don't know if you remember me, but Jacob. Of course I remember. How the hell are you? I heard about Martha. I'm sorry, man. Mike Peterson had been my partner in the Army, back when we were both young and stupid. After discharge, he'd become a private investigator. We'd lost touch when I got married and settled into suburban life, but I'd kept his card all these years. Mike, I need a favor, a big one. Name it. I need you to investigate my son. There was a long pause. Your son? Jacob, what's going on? I told him everything, the debts, the threats, the safari incident, my growing suspicion that Matthew had been hiding his true nature for years. Mike listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. You think he's done this before? Hurt people who got in his way? I think my son is a psychopath, Mike, and I think he's been one for a long time. I just refuse to see it. All right. I can run a full background check, look into his finances, his relationships, any legal troubles. But Jacob, if half of what you're telling me is true, you need to be careful, really careful. I know. How long do you need? Give me 48 hours. I have contacts who can expedite things, but promise me something. Don't confront him until I get back to you with what I find. I promise. After I hung up, I felt lighter than I had in months. For years, I'd been reactive, always responding to Matthew's crises, always trying to fix whatever mess he'd created. Now, for the first time, I was being proactive. I spent the rest of the morning walking around the lodge, thinking about my life with Martha, and how different things might have been if I'd seen Matthew clearly earlier. Would our marriage have been happier? Would Martha's final years have been less stressful? Around 11:30, I went back to the room to wait for Matthew's return. He walked in at exactly noon, like he'd been watching the clock. "Well, old man, what's it going to be?" I looked at him, really looked at him. He was handsome, in that superficial way that had always made people give him the benefit of the doubt. But now I could see the coldness behind his eyes, the barely concealed contempt in his smile. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," I began carefully. His expression brightened. "And? You're right about one thing. I have been weak. I've spent years making excuses for you, cleaning up your messes, pretending you were something you're not." He nodded, clearly pleased with this admission. "But you're wrong about something else. You said I should be afraid of you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The truth is, Matthew, you should be afraid of me." His smile faltered slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not going to give you a single dollar. Not today, not ever." His face darkened. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You're upset about yesterday, but yesterday was the best thing that could have happened to me. It showed me exactly who you are. You don't understand the kind of people I owe money to. Then you'd better figure out another way to pay them, because it won't be with my money." For a moment he just stared at me. Then his mask slipped completely, and I saw the rage underneath. "You stupid old fool. You think you can just say no to me after everything?" "After everything what, Matthew? After years of me enabling your selfishness? After me making excuses for behavior that should have horrified me? You're right. After everything, it's time I started being the father I should have been 20 years ago." He moved closer, and for a second I thought he might hit me. Instead he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. "Fine, Dad. Have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Matthew?" He paused at the door. "I love you. I will always love you. But I finally understand that loving someone sometimes means protecting the world from them." He left without another word, slamming the door behind him. I sat down in the chair by the window and waited for Mike's call. Whatever Matthew was planning next, I'd be ready for him. Mike's call came 36 hours later, just as I was finishing breakfast at the lodge restaurant. I'd spent the time in an odd state of calm, watching Matthew from a distance as he charmed other guests, played the role of the devoted son, checking on his accident-prone father, all while his eyes remained cold whenever he looked at me. "Jacob, you need to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting, Mike. What did you find?" There was a long pause, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Your son is worse than you thought. Much worse." My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Tell me. Let's start with the money. Matthew doesn't owe $200,000 to loan sharks. He's stolen approximately $400,000 from his employer over the past 18 months. Sophisticated embezzlement. The FBI has been investigating, but they don't have enough evidence yet." I closed my eyes, feeling sick. "What else?" 3 of his ex-girlfriends have restraining orders against him. Sarah was just the latest. The first one, Jessica Marks, claimed he pushed her down a flight of stairs when she tried to break up with him. She broke her collarbone. He convinced everyone it was an accident. Each revelation was like a physical blow. "Go on." "Emily Rodriguez. Remember that name? She was his girlfriend senior year of high school. After those photos of her were distributed, she attempted suicide. Spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility. Her parents moved her to another state to finish school." Mr. Pete. "Rodriguez, who'd been arrested for drug possession. Emily, his daughter." The pieces were falling into place in the most horrible way. "Jacob, there's more. I found records of 7 different insurance policies Matthew has taken out over the past 5 years. Life insurance policies. Want to guess who the beneficiary is on all of them? Himself. Bingo. Your policy alone is worth $1.2 million. But here's the kicker. 2 of the other policies were on people who are now dead." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "His roommate from college, Derek Mason, died in a hiking accident 2 years ago, fell off a cliff during a solo hike that Matthew had recommended. And his great-aunt Helen, your wife's aunt. Remember her? I did remember Helen. She'd died last year, found at the bottom of her basement stairs. Matthew had been visiting her regularly in the months before her death, helping with yard work and errands. I'd been so proud of him for being thoughtful with an elderly relative. Both deaths were ruled accidental, but Jacob, the statistical probability of someone having 2 people die accidentally on insurance policies he holds, it's astronomical. My hands were shaking now. Mike, are you saying my son is a serial killer? I'm saying your son is a psychopath who's graduated from petty cruelty to murder for profit. And based on what you told me about the safari incident, I think you were supposed to be his next victim. The restaurant around me seemed to fade away. Other guests were laughing, enjoying their vacations, completely unaware that they were sharing space with a monster. There's something else, Jacob. I found evidence that Matthew has been researching your daily routines, your medical history, your habits. He's been planning this for months. The safari wasn't spontaneous. He's been studying that particular area, learning about animal behavior patterns, timing everything perfectly. Jesus Christ. The good news is that we have enough evidence now to contact the authorities. The bad news is that Matthew is smart and careful. If he suspects you're onto him, he'll run. Or worse, he'll accelerate his timeline. I thought about Matthew's behavior over the past 2 days. The casual threats, the complete lack of remorse, the way he'd been watching me constantly while pretending to be the caring son. Mike, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to contact the FBI, the Kenyan authorities, everyone who needs to know about this, but don't tell them to arrest Matthew yet. Jacob, what are you planning? I'm planning to get him to confess, on record. There was a long silence. That's incredibly dangerous. If he realizes what you're doing, he won't, because he thinks I'm weak, remember? He thinks I'm the same pushover I've always been. That arrogance is going to be his downfall. Ow. I'd been thinking about this since yesterday. He wants me to transfer money to him, right? Well, I'm going to tell him I've changed my mind, that I'm scared and ready to give him what he wants, but I'll insist on doing it in person at a bank where there are security cameras and witnesses. And then what? Then I'll get him talking. Men like Matthew, they can't resist bragging about how clever they are, especially to someone they see as inferior. Mike was quiet for a long moment. Jacob, if this goes wrong, at least other people won't die. He's going to keep killing Mike. The insurance money, the embezzlement. He's addicted to it now. I can't live with knowing I could have stopped him and didn't try. All right, but we do this my way. I'm flying to Nairobi tonight. I'll coordinate with local authorities. Make sure they're ready to move the second we have what we need. Thank you, Mike. Don't thank me yet. Just promise me you'll be careful. Your son has killed at least 2 people, possibly more. He won't hesitate to kill you if he feels cornered. After I hung up, I sat in the restaurant for another hour, processing everything I'd learned. The sweet little boy who used to crawl into bed with Martha and me during thunderstorms. The teenager who'd cried when our dog died. The young man who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living with a stranger all these years? Someone who had been studying me, learning exactly what I needed to see to keep supporting him. I thought about Martha's final weeks, how she'd grown increasingly agitated whenever Matthew visited. I'd attributed it to the medication, the pain, the confusion that comes with terminal illness. But what if she'd seen something I'd missed? What if, in her weakened state, she'd been more perceptive than her healthy husband? That evening, I found Matthew at the bar, chatting with a young couple from Germany. He was being charming, funny, completely likable. When he saw me approaching, his expression shifted to one of concern. "Dad, there you are. I was getting worried." He turned to the couple. "My father had a bit of a scare yesterday, got separated from our group during the safari." The woman made sympathetic noises. "How frightening. You must have been terrified." "I was," I said, looking directly at Matthew, "but sometimes the things that scare us most turn out to be blessings in disguise." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, but his smile never wavered. Dad's always been philosophical. It's one of the things I admire about him. The couple eventually moved on, and Matthew and I were left alone at the bar. "You look better today," he said, "more relaxed." I've been doing some thinking. About? I took a deep breath, preparing to give the performance of my life. About what you said. About me being weak. About needing to face reality. His interest sharpened. And you're right, I have been living in denial about you, about myself, about what needs to happen next. I'm glad to hear that, Dad. So you've reconsidered my request? I have. But Matthew, I need you to understand something. This money represents everything your mother and I worked for, everything we saved for our future together. If I'm going to give it to you, I need to know exactly what kind of trouble you're in. He leaned back, studying my face. What do you mean? I mean, I need the whole truth. Not just that you owe money, but who you owe it to, how it happened, what they'll do if you can't pay. I need to know I'm not just throwing money away. For a moment I thought he might refuse. Then that familiar arrogance took over. Fair enough, he said, but not here. Too many ears. Let's go back to the room, and I'll tell you everything. As we walked through the lobby toward the elevators, I caught sight of myself in one of the mirrors. For the first time in months, I looked like a man with purpose. Matthew had no idea that everything was about to change. Back in our room, I sat in the chair by the window, while Matthew sprawled on the couch just like that first night. But everything had changed. This time, I was the one in control. All right, Dad, you want the truth? Here it is. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with the excitement of someone who'd been dying to share a secret. I've been skimming money for my company for over a year. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones, when I realized how easy it was. I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach was churning. How much? About $400,000 total. Jesus, Matthew, that's a federal crime. Only if you get caught, he laughed, completely at ease. And I wouldn't have gotten caught if it weren't for that bitch Sarah. What does Sarah have to do with this? She worked in accounting at a firm that did business with mine, started asking questions about some discrepancies she noticed. Coincidentally, right around the time she decided I was emotionally unavailable. The casual way he said it chilled me to the bone. So she knows. She suspects, but she can't prove anything, yet. His smile turned predatory, although that might not matter much longer. What do you mean? Let's just say Sarah might have an accident soon, nothing too dramatic, maybe a break-in gone wrong or a car accident on one of those winding mountain roads she loves to drive. Mom, my heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mike had given me a small recording device disguised as a pen, and I needed Matthew to keep talking. You've thought about this before, haven't you? Hurting people who get in your way. His grin widened. Dad, I've been doing it my whole life. You just never paid attention. What do you mean? Remember when I was 8 and that kid Tommy kept bothering me? I didn't just push him off the monkey bars. I loosened the bolts first. During lunch break, spent 3 days planning it. My mouth went dry. Matthew, or Emily Rodriguez in high school. You think I just happened to have those photos of her? I set up a camera in her bedroom when her family invited me for dinner. Poor little Emmy had no idea she was starring in her own private movie. Each confession was worse than the last, but I needed him to keep going. What about Derek, your roommate from college? Derek. Matthew's expression grew thoughtful. Now, that was a work of art. Did you know that if you loosen someone's climbing equipment just enough, it'll hold their weight for most of a climb, but fail at exactly the wrong moment? Took me weeks to research the physics of it. You murdered him for insurance money. I helped him die doing what he loved. If anything, I was merciful. He leaned back, completely relaxed. Derek was planning to report some of my early financial experiments. This way, everyone remembered him as a tragic accident victim instead of the snitch he was about to become. And Aunt Helen? Poor old Helen. Such a shame about those loose floorboards at the top of her basement stairs. But she was getting senile, Dad. Always forgetting things, mixing up her medications. I was actually doing her a favor. I felt physically sick, but I had to keep him talking. How many others have there been? Others? He tilted his head, considering. Well, there was my supervisor at my first job. He had a terrible allergic reaction to shellfish at the company Christmas party. Tragic, really. And there was this girl I dated briefly in college who threatened to expose some compromising photos I'd taken. She overdosed on sleeping pills mixed with alcohol. Very sad. Matthew, stop, please. Why? You wanted the truth. His voice turned cold. This is who I am, Dad. This is who I've always been. The only difference is that now I'm not pretending to be your perfect little boy anymore. You're sick. You need help. He laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. I'm not sick. I'm evolved. Most people are limited by conscience, by empathy, by all those inconvenient emotions that keep them weak. I'm free from all that. You're a monster. I'm successful. Do you have any idea how much money I've made over the years? How many problems I've solved? How many obstacles I've removed? He stood up and started pacing. The insurance payouts alone have set me up beautifully, and once I inherit your estate, I'll have enough to disappear completely. Start fresh, somewhere new. What makes you think you'll inherit anything? His pacing stopped. Because you're going to die, Dad. Probably tonight. The casual way he said it made my blood freeze. Matthew, oh, don't worry. It'll look completely natural. Heart attack brought on by the stress of our African adventure. You've been acting strange since the safari incident. Everyone's noticed. The grieving son will be inconsolable. Of course, might even blame himself for pushing you to take such an adventurous trip at your age. You have it all planned out. I've had it planned out for months. The safari thing was just supposed to be quicker. More poetic. You know, the man who never took risks, killed by his own timidity. But this works too. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. Potassium chloride, completely undetectable in an autopsy, unless they're specifically looking for it, which they won't be. Causes cardiac arrest in minutes. You'll just slip away. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Matthew, please, I'm your father. You're a weakness I can't afford anymore. He moved toward me, the vial in one hand. But I want you to know, Dad, in your final moments, this isn't personal, it's just business. That's when the door burst open. Mike Peterson charged in first, followed by 2 Kenyan police officers and an FBI agent who'd been flown in from the embassy. Matthew spun around, the vial still in his hand, his face shifting from confidence to confusion to rage in seconds. Jacob, step away from him, Mike shouted. Matthew looked at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not love, not remorse, pure hatred. You set me up. I saved lives, including probably my own. He lunged at me then, the vial raised like a weapon, but Mike tackled him before he could reach me. The vial shattered on the floor, its contents pooling harmlessly on the carpet. As the officers cuffed Matthew, he kept his eyes on me. You think you've won? You think this is over? I'll get out eventually, Dad. And when I do, I'll finish what I started. No, I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. You won't? Because I'm not going to be the weak man who raised you anymore. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. They led him away, still screaming threats, still promising revenge. But his words couldn't touch me now. Mike walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I am now. The recording device got everything. His confession, the planned murder, all of it. He's going away for life, Jacob. Multiple life sentences. I sat down heavily in the chair, suddenly exhausted. How many people do you think he actually killed? We may never know for sure, but you stopped him from killing more. That has to count for something. 3 months later, I was back in Portland, but not in the house I'd shared with Martha. I'd sold it and moved into a small apartment downtown, close to the volunteer work I'd started doing with at-risk youth, kids who reminded me of the boy Matthew had been before I failed him so completely. The trial had been a media sensation. Matthew, charming and handsome, maintaining his innocence even as the evidence mounted against him. 5 confirmed murders, 2 attempted murders, multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The prosecution painted him as a cold-blooded killer who'd been hiding in plain sight for years. I testified about the safari incident, about his confessions in that hotel room, about the vial of potassium chloride he'd intended to use on me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was necessary. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. As they led Matthew away after the sentencing, 5 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, he looked at me one last time. The mask was completely gone now. There was nothing human left in his eyes. "I should have killed you years ago," he mouthed. "You did kill me," I whispered back. "The man who was your father died the day you pushed me from that car. I'm someone else now." And I was. The weak, enabling father who'd spent 20 years making excuses for a monster was gone. In his place was someone harder, wiser, more careful, with his trust and his love. I think about Martha sometimes, about what she would say if she could see how this all ended. I like to think she'd be proud that I finally found the strength to do what was necessary, not just for me, but for all the people Matthew would have killed if I'd stayed silent. Some nights I still dream about that moment in the safari vehicle, when I looked into my son's eyes and saw nothing but hatred. But when I wake up, I'm not sad anymore. I'm grateful. Because that was the day I finally stopped being a victim and became the father I should have been all along. Not the father who enables and excuses, but the father who protects the world from the monsters he helped create, even when that monster is his own child.